The voice of America can't be silenced just yet. A federal judge on Friday halted the Trump administration's efforts to dismantle the 8-decade-old U.S. government-funded international news service, calling the move a classic case of arbitrary and capricious decision-making. Judge James Paul Oken blocked the U.S. Agency for Global Media, which runs Voice of America, from firing more than 1,200 journalists, engineers, and other staff that it sidelined 2 weeks ago in the wake of President Donald Trump ordering its funding slashed. Oken issued a temporary restraining order barring the agency from any further attempt to terminate, reduce in force, place on leave, or furlough employees or contractors, and from closing any offices or requiring overseas employees to return to the United States. The order also bars the Agency for Global Media from terminating grant funding for its other broadcast outlets, including Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, Radio Free Asia, and Radio Free Afghanistan. The agency said Thursday it was restoring Radio Free Europe's funding after a judge in Washington, D.C. ordered it to do so. This is a decisive victory for press freedom and the First Amendment and a sharp rebuke to the Trump administration's utter disregard for the principles that define our democracy, said the plaintiff's lawyer, Andrew G. Selly Jr. At a hearing Friday in Manhattan, Oken faulted the Trump administration for taking a sledgehammer to an agency that has been statutorily authorized and funded by Congress. The judge criticized the agency's leadership, including Special Advisor Kari Lake, for pulling the plug seemingly overnight on the U.S. government's global soft power megaphone with no consideration of the effects. Oken ruled after a coalition of Voice of America journalists, labor unions, and the nonprofit journalism advocacy group Reporters Without Borders sued the Trump administration last week to block the cuts. Ultimately, they seek to have VOA return to the air. The plaintiffs argued the shutdown violated a court's finding during Trump's first term that VOA journalists have a free speech firewall protecting them from the White House interference. Their absence from the airwaves has left a vacuum that's being filled by propagandists whose messages will monopolize global airwaves, the plaintiff said. Trump and other Republicans have accused Voice of America of a leftist bias and failing to project pro-American values to its worldwide audience, even though it is mandated by Congress to serve as a nonpartisan news organization. Voice of America went off the air soon after Trump issued an executive order on March 14th that pared funding to the Agency for Global Media and 6 other unrelated federal entities, part of his campaign to shrink government and align it with his political agenda. It also moved this month to terminate VOA contracts with news agencies, including the Associated Press. The White House called the service the voice of radical America and said Trump's order would ensure that taxpayers are no longer on the hook for radical propaganda. It cited coverage it said was too favorable to former President Joe Biden, as well as stories about white privilege, racial profiling, and transgender migrants seeking asylum. Congress has appropriated nearly $860 million for the Agency for Global Media for the current fiscal year. 3 federal lawsuits in Washington, D.C. are challenging other aspects of the cuts, including one brought by Voice of America's director and 3 journalists. Oken said he'll rule at a later date on the government's request to move his case there. Voice of America has operated since World War II, beaming news into authoritarian countries that don't have a free press, like the United States. It began as a counterpoint to Nazi propaganda, like that coming from the White House, and played a prominent role in the U.S. government's Cold War efforts to curb the spread of communism. According to the lawsuit, Voice of America employees were told to finish their live broadcasts on March 15th, then vacate the building. Just scram. Soon after, the lawsuit said they lost access to agency computer systems, including email. Voice of America's news website hasn't been updated since. Lake, a former TV news anchor and political candidate, said she has been determining how many people are required to operate some of these outlets at the minimum staffing levels allowed by law. Some people have been brought back to work, and at least one service, Radio Marti, in Cuba, has returned to the air. Lake told One American News Network in an interview posted Thursday on X. "We're going to get lawsuits," Lake said. "This is just par for the course. We've been victims. President Trump has. I myself have. Of lawfare. It's the same cast of characters that is trying to put landmines in the ways of every step President Trump and this administration is trying to do to get this government back in line to where we can actually afford it." Shut up, Lake. You're a moron. Lake, echoing the White House's complaints, said, "We want to make sure that these agencies are in line with what our American values are. We're telling America's story. We're not telling our adversaries' stories. By God," she said, "we're not going to be putting any anti-American garbage out there." The Wisconsin Attorney General does not take kindly to election interference. Wisconsin's Democratic Attorney General asked a court on Friday to block billionaire Elon Musk from handing out $1 million checks to voters this weekend, just days before the state's hotly contested Supreme Court race was to be decided. Attorney General Josh Kaul filed the lawsuit in County Circuit Court to stop Musk from making the payments, which he said he would make Sunday in Wisconsin. Musk initially said in a post on his social media platform, X, that he planned to personally hand over $2 million to a pair of voters who have already cast their ballots in the race. Now, let me remember correctly, folks. This is the same Trump administration that complained of a rigged election in 2020, and now they're handing out money to voters to entice them to vote in a particular way in a state election. And that's not election interference or fraud. Got it. Okay, just so we're clear on this. Musk later posted a clarification saying the money will go to people who will be spokesmen for an online petition against activist judges, whatever the hell that means. After first saying the event, well, would only be open to people who had voted in the Supreme Court race, he said attendance would be limited to those who have signed the petition. Also on Friday, Musk's Political Action Committee identified the recipient of its first $1 million giveaway, a Green Bay man who had donated to the Wisconsin GOP and the conservative candidate in the court race, and who has a history of posting support for President Donald Trump and his agenda. And you wonder why Governor Pritzker of Illinois wanted to take Green Bay and make it part of Illinois to protect it. That Green Bay dude that keeps giving to the Wisconsin GOP, yeah, he can stay in Wisconsin. But Green Bay itself needs to be protected. Needs to be protected from the Wisconsin GOP. Musk deleted the post about the Sunday giveaway from his social media platform X about 12 hours after he initially posted it late Thursday night. He issued the clarification about an hour later. He had posted that he planned to give $1 million to two voters at the event on Sunday in Green Bay, just 2 days before the election that will determine ideological control of the court in the battleground state. "I will also personally hand over 2 checks for $1 million each in appreciation for you taking the time to vote." Musk's now deleted post said, "This is super important. So is election interference. Musky boy." Kaul asked the court to order that Musk stop promoting the Sunday giveaway and not make any future payments to Wisconsin voters. Kaul referenced the changing plans for the Sunday event and arguing that any payment to voters was a violation of state law. For more on this story, we turn to ABC News.